Oh, cool trike. So anyway, this is part one of what I'm going to call the true legend of Jesse James. And true legend is a contradiction, obviously, because legends a lot of times don't have a lot of truth, and the truth don't quite hold up to what the legend tells you. So it's the best that I can get in sorting out the different stories that I've been told of what the story about Jesse and Frank James and the Outlaws are all about. And the reason why this is significant to me is I lived, when I was very little, we lived in the suburbs just southeast of downtown Kansas City. And I was 18 miles, I lived 18 miles from the James farm, the family farm where his mom used to give tours and tell some of the stories. And the three characters that are the main characters in this story are not just Frank and Jesse James, but their mom, Zerelda. I think she was a big part in whatever could be considered a legend with some of the stories she told. And while I won't ever say she out and out lied about anything, I think she was pretty well known for embellishing some stories when she gave the tours of the farm and describing some of the things that went on in her son's lives. But what this all gets back to, and I'm going to give you an overall view on the first part, and then we'll get into some more details in the second part. What this all goes back to is the Civil War. And the state of Missouri was kind of a divided state. Originally, when the Civil War started, they pretty much wanted to stay neutral and stay out of it. But as the Union Army would have it, they were kind of not giving them a choice in the matter. That it's kind of like at the point of the gun, you guys joined the Union side, and Missouri even put up a fight to try to determine their own destiny, and it didn't quite work against the Union troops. So Missouri was a state divided. Now the people that win the wars are always the ones that write the history books, so they write it from their own perspective, and they claim that 4 times as many people in Missouri supported the Union side as supported the Confederate side. And when I looked up the statistics, that doesn't quite match. Now, there were twice as many Union regulars claiming to be from Missouri as there was Confederate regulars. So that statistic shows me there's twice as many, but you also have to realize during those times there were a lot more non-regular troops or militia fighting. And I would be surprised if Missouri probably didn't have some of the biggest groups of militia fighting for the Confederate side of any state. So I would definitely say that Missouri was a Confederate state. And obviously the Confederate sides were the ones that lost the war. And after the war, the Union troops were very well known for harassing those people that supported the other side in the war effort, and those people that were non-Union sympathizers. In fact, some of the original militias that reformed and became outlaws were known by the name bushwhackers, and that's where the term bushwhacker comes from, although at the time they were actually active. I don't think they were actually known by that name. That was later on in the retelling of the stories. And then the irregulars that were the supporters of the Union side were known as jayhawkers. These would be irregulars and militias that would form up, and sometimes they would even pretty much be outlaws too. They would, part of the time they'd fight for a cause, but the rest of the time they wouldn't have any problem with robbing people or harassing people or doing whatever else outside the law that they felt like doing. So there's no real totally good guys on either side, and there's no real totally bad guys on either side. It's kind of a mixture. So anyway, that's kind of the overall of how, at least in this area just west of the Mississippi, The outlaws were basically formed up as bands or groups of people that pretty much wanted to protect themselves from union harassment. And since when you're traveling around in groups like that, you pretty much don't have a way of making a living like a farmer that just lives off the land or something like that. So basically you have a choice. You're just pretty much going to have to live an illegal lifestyle to make do. I'm not saying this is an excuse, because everybody has the right to choose what they want to do, good, bad, or otherwise. So, you know, you're still responsible for what you did, but at least that's the reason they did what they did. If not an excuse, it's at least why they felt themselves they had to do what they had to do. So anyway, on the next part, I will start getting into the details. I'll start with the life of Jesse James' mom, Zerelda Cole, and her getting married to Jesse James' dad, and all the stuff that kind of started out in the beginning of his childhood. And he's particularly, I think, of all the outlaws I've ever heard, maybe you could call him a little more of a sympathetic character. Not that he was ever anything like a good guy or a Robin Hood like people portray him to be, but I think if you really listen to the way his life started and some of the things that happened, and I think it'll kind of give you a pause for thought that had circumstances been different and he'd have been raised in a different time under different circumstances, he quite likely might not have been an outlaw. He might have actually chosen a more respectable profession to make a living at, and it might have turned out quite different. Whereas in my opinion, his brother Frank probably was a little bit more cold-blooded than him, and probably regardless of any circumstance probably would have been an outlaw. But like everything else, this is just hearing the stories I heard from people, listening to the facts, checking on the facts that I'm aware of, and looking at the history and giving you my take of it. So this will be the end of part 1, and then part 2 we will start with Jesse James' mom when she was a little girl.